Hello and welcome to 8 Minute Equity, a video series from Ledgy, where we unpack an interesting equity topic in around 8 minutes. So this time you join us for a conversation on employee benefit trusts. I'm Joe, I'm the content and communications lead at Ledgy, and I'm delighted today to be joined by Veronika Lipinska, Director for Share Plans and Incentives at global accounting firm BDO. A solicitor by training, Veronika is a tax advisor specializing in employee share plans. Veronika, it's great to have you with us.
Hi, Joe. Great to be here.
Happy to have you. So let's dive into employee benefit trusts. Veronika, can you start by providing a quick definition of what we're talking about here?
Sure. So, employee benefits trusts are a separate legal entity, a trust,
Yeah.
which is set up for the benefit, as the name suggests, of employees of the group. So, it's a legal entity where companies typically ring fence equity for employees. So, shares are issued directly to an EBT.
Mm.
And the EBT can serve as a warehouse for the shares. So, for example, if you have an EMI plan or a CSOP plan, you can make awards under the plan. And then when they vest, when the options are exercised, shares are transferred from the EBT to the individual employees. You can also use an EBT as a market in the shares. So employees can buy and sell shares into the EBT.
Mm.
But ultimately, it is a place where you can ring fence equity for the purpose of your plan, which is great because it sends a very clear message to the employees. Those shares are for you.
Absolutely. And so a great start. I'd love to know though, what types of company benefit most from EBTs? You can situate your share plans inside an EBT, but is it better for early stage, better for late stage? What are your recommendations?
Sure. So EBTs can be set up by companies of any size, any level of maturity. You can be a startup and have an EBT, or you
Mhm.
can be a listed entity and have an EBT.
Mhm.
Actually, a lot of listed entities actually have an EBT that operates in conjunction with their share plan. So these are fairly common. However, from a practical point of view, because it costs money to set up an EBT and to run it,
Yeah.
we typically tend to see them for more mature private enterprises with wider employee shareholder base,
Yeah.
because they tend to maybe not be looking for a classic exit, not looking for that share sale or an IPO. They would like to grow organically, but they need some sort of a market for their shares. So they tend to be more mature companies that can afford to run an EBT.
And you mentioned the costs that are involved with setup and so on. What would you say as a guideline would be a standard sort of annual cost for administering the EBT?
Yes. So typically, when you're setting up an EBT, you're looking at hiring professional advisors to help you structure it. You need to be careful around how you set up an EBT in the correct way, not to
Mm.
trigger any tax liabilities. So typically, you have advisors' fees, and then you also have trustee setup fees.
Mhm.
Most companies tend to engage professional trustees. I would say roughly you're looking at £10,000 in setup costs.
Sure.
And then you've got your ongoing administration costs coming from trustees. And those fees tend to be dependent on how many employees you have in the scheme and
Yeah.
how much activity there is in a year.
Super useful. Thank you for that. And so let's move on to talk about the pros and cons of EBTs. We've outlined a few of the ways in which they can definitely be useful to companies, and a couple of downsides as well, maybe. So, when companies are weighing up their options, what are the main attractors and detractors?
Sure. So the pros are equity is ring fenced for employees. You don't have the case of, like many companies have unissued equity in their share plan, Unissued equity, of course, doesn't exist. It only gets issued when awards get exercised. With an EBT, you've got shares already there in an EBT, ready to be distributed and transferred to employees.
Mhm.
Another positive is that many companies have problems with levers. They can be problems to do with how do you get a lever to sell the shares? Who will be the buyer? Many individual shareholders might not be interested in purchasing the shares. So the company might want to use its own cash to finance the purchase.
Sure.
If you went ahead with a share buyback, with the classic share buyback where the company buys shares from the lever, this can be treated for tax purposes, at least in the UK, like a dividend. And that's not the tax treatment that people expect. Employees are typically looking at capital gains tax treatment when they sell the shares. So a company buyback might not work because even though in some circumstances the capital treatment may be available, it's only available to a very narrow category of levers. So an EBT helps you solve that problem. Now, in terms of the cons, of course, there is the setup cost and the operational cost, the trustee cost.
Yeah.
But also you need to be careful around where you locate your EBT. Is it in the UK? Is it offshore? You need to be careful around how you fund it. Are you using loans? Are you using gifts? So there's a lot to think about to make sure that you achieve the result you want.
Definitely. And so just to finish up, can you explain why companies should think about EBTs, if they're in the right size, the right stage of their development and so on? What are the 2 or 3 key takeaways?
Yes. So a lot of the time, an EBT will work really nicely with an EMI plan or a CSOP plan, where you can use the EBT to service your EMI or CSOP awards. That's one. Another one is if you have a lot of equity locked with levers. So if you've got lever equity that you want to reallocate to new joiners, an EBT is a very good and can be a tax efficient answer to your worries in that department.
Yeah.
And the third one, also a big one, which we see in practice, is that if you want to grow organically, if you're not looking at a classic IPO or share sale type exit, you might want to provide interim exits or interim liquidity for otherwise illiquid stock. If you're not comfortable operating a matched market for the shares, or you want to offer some sort of secondary, an EBT can be a very good tool for that. So those 3 reasons.
Amazing. Super useful, Veronika. And thank you very much for all those insights on employee benefit trusts. You've been watching 8-Minute Equity. To learn more about making equity work for your company, just head to ledgy.com. Thanks very much.